my name is Casey Tanner. I'm a licensed clinical practicing counselor in Chicago in the United States. And I'm working with entomology, which I'm so excited about. And we're going to be talking about coming out, all the nuances around coming out, including creating a safe space within yourself, a safe space within your environment, how to come out. So some tips and feedback around that. And some overarching thoughts about coming out that I just wanted to put out there are that I really believe in an ideal world that no one would have to come out, and that we would just socialize people in a less heteronormative, cisnormative way and ask people better questions. So instead of kids getting asked, do you have a boyfriend? They would just get asked, do you like anyone at school? And we wouldn't sort of ask the questions that tell people there's only one way to be. And so that being said, many of us still have to come out. And so I want to talk about some of the ways folks in the community have figured out how to do that.
Silva Neves. I am a psychosexual and relationship psychotherapist, and I am here discussing coming out with entomology because it is Pride Month, and it's a very, very important subject, I think, because lots of people are still a little bit confused about it all, and I get a lot of questions about accepting one's sexuality and what to do with coming out. So it's really, really great that I can speak with entomology about that. So thank you very much.
Well, I think that listening is just always a good place to start. You may find that, if someone's coming out to you, you may have a lot of questions, but before you jump into your questions, just listen and follow that person's lead, because they've probably thought a lot about it. And they probably know what they want to tell you and what they don't want to share. And so follow their lead before you sort of jump in with your questions. I think even in thinking about how to respond, saying, thank you for telling me, or thank you for trusting me with this, is a really sort of good response that doesn't sort of overreact in either direction. Because over celebrating and making too big of a positive deal can be just as harmful as having a negative reaction, depending on what that person needs. And they may not want a big deal made out of their coming out. And I think that also speaks to something really important, which is don't make assumptions about what they want that coming out process to look like. So you may want to go tell the world, you may want to go tell the grandparents or, the other people in your friend group, but that person may have their own idea of what their coming out process will look like. And we want to respect that. So never making an assumption. And again, following their lead, not just in the conversation itself, but who do they want to come out to and when. And I think when it comes to asking your questions, it's not that questions and curiosity is bad by any means, but I always suggest filtering questions through a lens of, am I asking this question for me, or am I asking this question for this person coming out to me, right? So a question that would be for the person coming out to you would be, how can I support you? Or what do you need from me around this? But a question that might be more for you might be, but what about the time you dated a guy in high school? How can you say that you're a lesbian, right? That's about you. That's about your projections of what it means to be in the LGBTQ community. And it's not the time to sort of investigate and interrogate that person's past. This person knows who they are, so take what they're saying at face value. And then after the conversation, I do think it can be helpful to read up, learn how to be an ally and an advocate, and at the same time, don't overgeneralize. So books and resources try to do a really good job, and yet they by nature overgeneralize. And so know the person you're talking to, ask them specifically what feels good for them versus just reading a resource and applying it to everybody who's coming out.
So if someone is coming out to you, I think the best thing to do is to keep an open arms and to really ask them if there's anything that they need whilst they are coming out to you. So it could be asking them, really checking with them if it's right, and also to not ask any questions to start with, just to let them talk as they want to talk, and for you to just be really engaged. So that's really how you can create a really, really safe and warm space, is with no pressure of anything to be discussed. It's just really an open space for that person to come out to you. Once the person that has come out to you it is okay to actually ask them some questions, but the question is good to keep them, quite open. So, for example, questions like, are you dating anyone at the moment? Okay, it's quite a personal question. It depends on your relationship too, but also be prepared for the person to come out to not want to answer, and not to take it personally if they don't want to answer, because coming out is a very, very big thing to start with. And so they might just want to come out, make their statement, and not answer any questions. But it's okay for you to have some questions. It's okay for you to be curious. It's just really judging, with the relationship, whether you can either get the answer straight away, or maybe hold the questions for another time, because there will be plenty more times.
So there are so many different ways that people feel safe. There's no one size fits all, but I like to give the advice that you don't have to be all or nothing about it, and you can actually start small. I think people often feel pressure to start with the most important people in their life, to sit down their family or their closest friends. But I actually invite people to give themselves permission to tell somebody who's more in the peripheral of their lives first, as a sort of test run. How does it feel to be in my body when I'm coming out? What was my experience of their reaction? So, for example, when I came out, I actually reached out to a friend that I hadn't spoken to in months, but I knew for sure 100% that she was going to be queer affirming. So even though she wasn't super instrumental in my life after coming out, it was instrumental that I had come out to somebody that I had expectations that were pretty realistic about the outcome. So that's one way to do it. Another way folks really benefit from is creating some kind of safe space online or virtually before coming out to someone in person. So this can happen on Instagram, it can happen in the blog world, it can happen on Facebook, but having a space where even if you don't know the people in person, you can go back to them if you do have a hard conversation and process and know that they're going to respond to you in the way that you need them to. And then when it does come to coming out to those key people in your life, I recommend sort of testing the waters. And often people in the LGBTQ community will do this on and off throughout their life. Their ears will perk up when they, hear their parent react to a gay character on television, or they'll hear a friend, respond to somebody coming out as trans in a movie, right? And those are the ways that as LGBTQ folks, we sort of are vigilant around who's going to be safe and who's not going to be safe. And so I say, before you come out to somebody, just sort of turn up the dial on that. Notice the way that people are reacting to queerness in the media, bring it up around a political sector and see how folks respond when it's not about you personally. And that will give you some feedback around how they're more likely to respond to you when you do come out to them about yourself. And then if you're doing it in person, I say give yourself permission to leave or pause the conversation at any time. This does not have to be sort of an all-out life story if you don't want it to be. If you do, awesome. But if you don't, you don't owe it to people to answer all their questions. You don't owe it to people to stay there and take whatever feedback they have. You're absolutely allowed to hit pause. And it's for that reason that some people really do like coming out via phone call, text, or letters, because it does give you a little bit of a more concrete boundary you can set if the conversation starts to go downhill, right? Like you can hang up the phone. If you write a letter, you can specifically set a boundary that says hey, please don't reach out for a week until after you've had some time to process this. And so I think that there are different ways that you can set yourself up for success in being able to set boundaries if you do need to. And of course, family and friends aren't the only people we have to come out to. Many of us are in workplaces where we either want coworkers to know, or we are transitioning in terms of gender, and it's going to become apparent that we're transitioning. And so I typically advise folks to first know the different employment discrimination laws in their states. And Human Rights Campaign. They are out of California, but they basically have maps that show the different discrimination laws across the world, give you a sense for what kind of laws are there to protect you if you're coming out in the workplace. And if you are in a workplace that does feel safe, or you have a relationship with a superior or one of your human resource directors, they can be good allies to you in that process. And they can let you know how the company has handled things like this before, and they can ask you and collaborate with you on how you want to handle your coming out process at work.
So first of all, it's really thinking about who you want to come out to and how. So some people prefer to come out one person at a time, and some people want to do what we call like a global come out, so coming out to everybody at the same time. It's really, really up to you, and it's going to be depending on how safe you feel things are for you. So for example, if you live in a community that you are not really sure how they're going to respond to coming out because they have some judgmental ideas about sexuality, you might not want to come out, all at once. You might just want to find first one safe person, the safest person that you feel the most comfortable with, and really try it out with that safest person. And when you meet that first person, you can either choose to be in a quiet, safe place, if that's what you prefer. But if you're really not sure how this is going to pan out, you might want to choose a public place, for example, where usually in a public place, people are on their best behavior. And also, you know that there can be an exit strategy straight away, just in case something goes wrong. So I think it's important, unfortunately, it's important to think about those things because safety always comes first. But some people choose to come out by text or with an email, and sometimes even on social media. And that actually is nothing wrong with that. Sometimes this is really how people feel the safest place to come out. And it can be just as good. And also it leaves the other person that receives the news to have some space for themselves to kind of process. And it's safe because there's nobody at a direct contact. So to start with, it's really for you to really think about your audience in some ways. And the way that you can figure it out is over time by, breaching those kind of conversations, but, with different things. For example, you might say a conversation like, oh, have you seen the TV series Hollywood on Netflix and with, gay characters? And judging by how your friends or your family members respond to that, you can actually judge whether they are, generally open to people having sexualities that are not heterosexual. Or you might also think, oh gosh, there are some people here that are really not so open about this. So then you can decide who you come out to and who you don't come out to. It's important to think also about the fact that if you decide not to come out to some people, it's actually 100% okay not to do that, because it doesn't make your sexuality less real if you decide to not come out to some people. But really choose the safe people first. I think that's very important, and consider the time and the place as well. So, for example, you might want to come out at a time where it's not very late at night, when people are tired, when people are less maybe responsive, or less having less energy to take on a news like this. You might want to do it in a place that's not so busy, where there's not too much distraction, so that you can get the full attention of the person you're coming out to. But as I said, it's very much up to you, because for some people it's easier to come out in a public place. So really check that. So really to recap, it's just really to think about your audience first. Check first with some conversations, how open they are, and judging by that, really finding a safe person first before you come out to everybody else. And I think that's really the main point that I'd like to say about the safe space.
So when you have expectations and hopes for how someone will respond to your coming out, and their reaction doesn't match those expectations and hopes, there are some different ways that I recommend taking care of yourself and helping yourself feel safe again after those really, really tough conversations. My first sort of piece of advice is distract first and process later. So you don't need to jump into intellectualizing and processing what happened, what went wrong, because right after a conversation like that, your body is likely to sort of be in a fight or flight response, and it needs to be soothed before you can move into sort of thinking through what happened and what to do next. So really, I tell people, treat yourself the way you would a small child, and go back to the basics. So wrap yourself in a blanket, or just go back to your breath. Put on a TV show that you know is funny, that you've watched a million times before. Make yourself your favorite meal, right? Like all of these very basic comfort things that are going to get you through that initial phase of what can feel really traumatic after coming out and having somebody respond negatively. And then once you sort of get to a place where your body feels a little bit more regulated, sort of back to homeostasis, then you can start to process. So if you've taken advice that I sort of gave earlier, then you might have an online space in which you can go and talk to people. I always recommend, if it's possible and accessible to you, to have a therapist who's either in the community or done really explicit work around queerness and coming out, who can be there for you. I would even say schedule the session ahead of time for right after you plan to have this coming out conversation. That way, you know, in an hour from now, I'm going to get this really good support. And not everybody does have access to a therapist. So it might be you have a teacher or a professor that you really trust in this area. It might be a mentor. It might be a family friend. There's no rules about who you can and can't go to get support around this. And again, permission to either return to that conversation with that person later. Some people's first reactions aren't their final reactions. And in fact, I find that that's the case most of the time, but sometimes they are. And so figuring out for yourself, is this a safe person to return back to? If so, when is safe? Do I maybe want to bring somebody with me? Or maybe it's deciding, hey, like it's not worth it for me. This relationship really wasn't central in my life. I'm going to sort of move forward with the people who are behind me. Both of those are totally okay. And I think, more than anything, giving yourself permission to grieve if what you'd hoped for didn't pan out. Because grief can look so many different ways. It can be sadness, it can be anger, it can be denial, it can be, and eventually it can be acceptance. But there are those early phases that we do need to go through when we have a loss. And coming out to somebody who doesn't react in an accepting way is a loss. And so giving yourself permission to grieve that around that relationship, and then find those relationships that in which people do react positively and celebrate there.
That is very interesting, actually, because at the moment in the UK, we might think that it's actually really, really okay and really safe to come out, and everybody should come out. And there's almost a kind of like a pressure to come out as a rite of passage, if you will. And actually, it's not always the case, because with some people, coming out is still quite a difficult process with difficult people, and it's not really going as well as it should go. So it's really important to really think about that a bit more slowly, and not to come out just because there's a pressure of coming out. And there are some coming out that can be more accepted than others in the world that we live in at the moment. So for example, if you come out as a gay man, right now it's actually a lot more accepted than if you come out as a trans person, for example, or even bisexual, because people find bisexuality quite confusing. And to really be prepared that some people will not understand. So even now in this day and age, we still get people to thinking that being a gay man, for example, is a lifestyle choice rather than a sexuality that you were born with. And same thing with trans people. Sometimes they get to hear, oh, well, you chose a really difficult life to live. And it's actually not a choice, when you're a trans person, you're actually born, in the body that is not the one that you psychologically feel like. So it's not that simple. And a lot of people can get really, really disappointed when they bring up a lot of courage to try to come out, and they're coming out and it's so courageous and it takes so much energy and so much preparation. And what they get back is a bit of minimizing of it, either, oh, well, that's your choice, you know, or minimizing as in, oh, well, it's not a big deal anyway, why are you doing this? Not realizing it is still a big deal because unfortunately coming out still has to happen because of homophobia. So so those are the kind of like nuance, the small nuances. We get to hear, thankfully, we get to hear so many great coming out stories when it's been such a healing process, and everybody's been really accepted, and they get to hear their parents and their family to say, you know, you're still my son, you're still my daughter, I still love you very much as you are. And those are really, really fantastic. And it happens more and more in the UK now, which is great. But it's also to think that it's not always always like this. And from that really great, perfect story of coming out and everybody's loving and accepting, to being totally rejected and out in the streets, which still does happen now in this country. There is a huge spectrum of it all, and some of the gray areas, for example, is when you come out and your parents and your family are all accepting and say, yeah, that's fine, there's no issue, I still love you, and so on. And then some conversations stop happening. For example, do you have a boyfriend? Do you have a girlfriend? Are you dating anyone at the moment? Or what are you doing this weekend? Those conversations disappear because family members and parents just either don't want to know, or they are uncomfortable asking the questions because they will be uncomfortable with the answers. And that is a form of not, you know, being accepted, but not being fully accepted. And actually that can, you know, create some, you know, issues in the persons that come out. It can create some disappointment in the person that's come out. So it's important to consider because when you come out, it's a very big vulnerable process. It's a great healing transition process, and at the same time, it can leave you feeling a little bit hurt occasionally, a little bit disappointed occasionally, and those hurt and disappointment are things that you might have to live with for an ongoing basis. Now, it doesn't mean that you can have a really great, fulfilling life after come out, but sometimes it's not always so clear-cut, and it's not always so neat as everybody is fully accepted and getting on.
So what are some tips and advice on how to come out? Well, there are many ways people like to do this. Some people really like those in-person conversations, but other people prefer doing it through letters, texts, or phone calls because it does create some distance if the conversation does get hard. Also, coming out doesn't have to be all or nothing, and you don't have to come out to everybody the same way. So you may prefer email with one person, but an in-person talk with those other key people in your life. And then maybe you allow the rest of people to sort of find out as your social media changes and evolves. There's no wrong way, and there's also no one way. And I think that goes for labeling yourself as well. I think a lot of people feel pressure to label themselves as lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans when they come out. And it's okay if you don't have a label yet, or if labels just aren't important to you. So don't put that pressure on yourself, and don't allow other people to put that pressure on you either. And you're also allowed to ask other people to come out for you. You don't have to have a direct conversation with everybody that you come out to. And so feel free to ask trusted people to say like, hey, I don't really feel like talking to that person. Would you mind just filling them in that I'm, you know, dating this gender now? And so I think overarching, the message is there really aren't rules, and just do what feels right for you.
Some quick tips and advice on how to come out. So I think choosing your language is important. So one thing that you can do is rehearse a little bit, and you might want to come out and choose different types of words with different type of people that you're going to come out to. And so one way could be to come out and say, you know, I've thought for a long time about wanting to tell you, but I thought that you're a really important person in my life. So I really want to share that with you, that I am, you know, and then whatever you want to share, you know, I am gay, I am trans, I'm a lesbian, I'm a bisexual, whatever it is. And so that's really how you can start. You can start by thinking, I want to do this with you because my relationship is important. My relationship with you is important, so that's why I want to do that. And I think it sets the scene, you know, really well for the other person to be fully engaged with that conversation. Other times, and with other people, you might want to come out when you introduce your partner, your current partner of the time. Sometimes it might be just a come out that's kind of not a formal conversation about a coming out, but more like, hey, yeah, sure, I come to the party this weekend. Can I invite my boyfriend, for example, or can I invite my girlfriend? And that's one way that you can come out, but without really making such a big event of it. Some people don't want to come out this way, but other people prefer it that way. And as I said earlier, another good tip is to try out with a safest person first, and you might try out with the safest method for you first. So it can be coming out by text, for example, if that's your preferred method, because if you're safest with it, it's actually totally fine to do that. And the last point, and I've talked about this before, but I think it's a very, very important point. It's always safety first for you, even if you think that it's going to go very well. We don't truly know how people react to big news. Some people might not be surprised at all, but some other people might be really quite surprised. So it's always to think about, where is my exit strategy? Where is the place that I need to do it? And it's really up to you, because it's your coming out, it's nobody else's coming out. So make it work for you, have the right space for you, the right place, the right time, and with the right words that feels okay for you.